The morning sun streamed gently through the large windows of the mansion, painting the white marble of the kitchen in a warm, golden glow, as if the light itself had chosen that perfect spot to settle. The room radiated a calm harmony, like one of those TV ads that sell not just products, but an ideal life. Everything looked perfect, or almost. Karen Thompson ran the bread knife smoothly across the crust, her hands moving with graceful precision, like someone performing a well-practiced dance. Her serene expression concealed the constant in her struggle to uphold the image she had built over the years, that of an unstoppable woman. And she was more than a successful fashion entrepreneur. Karen was a role model, an admired activist, a beloved influencer. But above all, she was a mom who inspired millions. Her followers loved seeing her organized routine, her vibrant lunches, and those heartfelt sticky notes tucked into her son's lunchbox. Many saw her as the perfect mom. But Karen knew and felt that keeping up that perfection took effort. Every single day. "Henry, honey, eat up," she said warmly, tucking a stray curl behind the boy's ear. "You have music class today, remember?" Henry looked up at her with those big, bright eyes that seemed to hold every color in the world. He smiled, and just that smile was enough to turn any morning into a miracle. He was 8 years old and radiated energy wherever he went. The kind of kid who made adults feel small and, at the same time, inspired them to be better. His golden curls caught the sunlight, his skin was lightly tan and warm, features that, at first glance, didn't look like they belonged to anyone in the house. But Karen had never cared. Henry was part of her body, her soul, her very destiny. More her son than any title, fortune, or career milestone could ever be. The sound of dress shoes on the hardwood floor broke the quiet moment. Oliver, her husband, appeared adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror, typical morning rush. "I checked my schedule," he said, pressing a kiss to Henry's forehead. "If all goes well, I can leave early and pick him up today." "Thanks, honey," Karen replied with a warm smile, the kind that only couples who had survived countless hard nights together could truly understand. It felt like just another day. Another Tuesday. Calm, well-organized, predictable. Until it wasn't. In the middle of science class at the school they had handpicked with care, Henry simply collapsed. He didn't trip. Didn't slip. Didn't lose his balance. He just fell. As if someone had switched him off. Like a puppet whose strings had been cut all at once. Hours later, the children's hospital waiting room felt unbearably close. Even with comfy chairs and decor designed to soothe, the room felt smaller than it should. Time didn't pass, it crawled, sticky and slow, like warm gum. Karen sat motionless, hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. Oliver paced back and forth as if movement could somehow speed up the clock. Then the doctor appeared. Her white coat looked heavier than usual. Her serious eyes held the kind of expression that comes before difficult truths. "He had a seizure followed by a sudden loss of consciousness," the doctor explained calmly. "We're looking into the cause. Blood tests showed some irregularities." "Irregularities?" Karen echoed, her voice so faint she hardly recognized it. "There are signs of a rare genetic condition that affects blood cell production," the doctor continued. "In some cases, the only effective treatment is a transplant." Oliver took a deep breath, trying to stay composed as his hands began to tremble. "A transplant? Bone marrow?" he asked. "Yes. But not just any donor will do," the doctor replied. "Success depends on a perfect match. And for that, we urgently need the biological parents' information. Mother and father." Her words hung in the air like a weight that nobody dared to touch. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something much bigger. A truth waiting to come to light. A secret held too long. The doctor's gaze moved between them, her voice measured but direct. "Are you Henry's biological parents?" Karen felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The air grew heavy, like every breath had become a challenge. Oliver reached for her hand and held it tight, as if that grip could keep her from breaking apart. She closed her eyes for a moment, searching for the strength buried deep inside her heart. The courage to say what had never been spoken aloud before. And then, with a trembling but determined voice, she answered. No. Her eyes met the doctor's, unwavering, though full of pain. Henry is adopted. And in that moment, the perfect life she had built over the years shattered, silently, like glass cracked under pressure. Not into a million pieces, but into one sharp, aching fear, losing the one who had always been, to her, everything. The hospital room was spacious but suffocating. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was tense, held together by fear, masked by machines blinking green and yellow, like tiny beacons guiding a fragile thread of hope. The cold air conditioning stood in sharp contrast to the fever of thoughts burning through Karen's mind. Henry slept, looking so small in that oversized bed. White sheets and wires surrounded him like the strange roots of some unfamiliar tree, connecting him to the machines that whispered life into him. His face was serene, as if he were far away, somewhere none of this could touch him. Karen sat right by his side, unmoving, like a statue in silent prayer. Her hand clutched his with a force that drained the color from her knuckles. It was a quiet, desperate grip, as though she could hold his life in her hands just by willing it. Behind her, Oliver stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall. Silent. On the outside, he looked composed, but inside he was a storm. He had known this truth from the beginning, but he'd never had to face it like this. Never with their son's life at stake. Never with this kind of urgency. Now, that secret was no longer tucked away like a forgotten photograph. It was a scream. It had a face, a name, and it could be fatal. What if we can't find her? Karen finally spoke, her voice low and jagged, as if it might shatter. What if we're too late? Oliver stepped closer. Fear darkened his eyes, but his voice, though quiet, was steady. We will. We have the money, the connections, the whole world would move for you, Karen. If there's someone who can move mountains for Henry, it's you. She closed her eyes and let a single tear slip down her cheek before swallowing it back like someone who refuses to show weakness when it comes to love. For years, that secret had been protected like something sacred. Henry's adoption was never public, not to close friends, not even in interviews. No social media posts, no big announcements. It was quick and discreet. A deal set up by a private lawyer with powerful connections. No spotlight, no questions. A choice made quietly and from the heart, but one that now demanded answers. Henry was born at a small clinic far from the city, with almost no paperwork. His mother was a young, homeless girl, pregnant, vulnerable, and desperate. Back then, they told Karen she had agreed to the adoption. That she just wanted her baby to have a better life, far from hardship. And Karen had believed it. Needed to believe it. But now, the past was back. Not as a gentle memory, but as a tidal wave, dragging everything with it. We need that lawyer, Oliver said, voice low but urgent. William Martin. He's the only one who ever had information on Henry's birth mother. Karen nodded slowly, as if stepping into a place she'd long tried to erase. William Martin, she murmured. Do you remember what happened after? Months later, when I tried to reach him. Oliver's expression grew darker. He'd disappeared. Closed his office. Every number went dead. A heavy silence filled the room. The kind that carries decisions waiting to happen. Then we hire someone, Karen said, lifting her chin. The best private investigators out there. If there's someone who can track her down, we'll find them. Money is not an issue. Oliver wrapped his arms around her gently, careful as if she might shatter. For a moment, she let him hold her, her head pressed against his chest. Not because she was relaxing, but because she was bracing herself for the fight ahead. We need to be careful, he whispered. If this gets out, if the press catches wind of this, you know what could happen. The image you've built. The followers. The brand you've created. Karen met his gaze, her eyes damp but unwavering. Henry is dying, Oliver. If I have to burn it all, my image, my career, my reputation, so be it. None of that matters. I don't need the world to see me as perfect. I just need my son to live. And in that moment, Oliver saw the woman he had first fallen in love with all over again. Not the successful businesswoman. Not the public figure. The real Karen, the one who would fight tooth and nail for what she loved. The one who would take on the world and herself for her child. By morning, the hospital still carried the same quiet tension, but a new energy was in the air. A sense of action. Of urgency turning into movement. A man in a dark suit crossed the lobby with measured steps. A slim briefcase tucked under his arm, his sharp gaze suggesting someone who'd seen too much already. George Miller. Former cop. Now a private investigator specializing in delicate cases for people with something to lose. A quiet name whispered in wealthy circles. Expensive, but worth every penny. Karen met him in a private room, far from cameras and prying eyes. I need you to find a woman named Grace, she said, handing him Henry's birth certificate. That's all I have. Mother's name, Grace Marilyn Johnson. No hometown listed. No fixed address. George examined the paper carefully, his practiced eyes searching between the lines, as if hoping to catch some hidden clue. No address. No social security number. No school records, no hospital files, he noted, then looked up. And the lawyer? Gone? Karen's chest felt tight as she nodded. That's right, she replied. But it's not impossible. He paused for a moment, studying the woman in front of him. Elegant posture. Perfectly styled hair. A face that was famous online but now bore the weight of a mother's fear. I'll start today, he finally said. He tucked the papers into his briefcase and left without another word. Alone again, Karen stared at her reflection in the window, her hands trembling ever so slightly. Every hair was in place, her blazer immaculate. But none of that could hide the way her chin quivered, or the tear threatening to fall. The truth was back. And this time, it wasn't just knocking politely on the door. It was coming to collect. And the price would be steep, far steeper than anything she ever thought she could pay. Karen's world was now split into two separate universes that never seemed to touch. On one side was the hospital, cold, sterile, and impersonally cruel, where every second was marked by relentless beeping and hushed voices of hurried doctors. A place where life was measured in numbers on a screen, and where her most precious treasure, her son, fought on without knowing it. On the other side was the city, vibrant, noisy, indifferent. The urban jungle pulsed with car horns, hurried footsteps, blowing signs, and countless conversations spilling out of cafes, subway cars, and back alleys. A city teeming with faces that passed too fast, faces that could hide Grace. Grace, the woman who held the answers. Grace, the enigma that had now become the key to saving Henry. George, with the sharpness and calm of someone who had long ago learned to navigate the shadows, began his search the moment the papers hit his hands. Within 2 days, he'd already uncovered vital fragments, Henry's birth certificate, medical records from the delivery, and an address for the long-closed clinic where everything had happened. Even more valuable, a lead. The clinic shut down 5 years ago, George told Karen as he thumbed through the files. But the head nurse still lives in the city. Her name's Jane Harper. They drove to an old part of town where time moved slower. Streets felt frozen in the past. The houses had peeling paint, rusting fences, and unkempt gardens, places where nobody was in a hurry. A neighborhood steeped in memories. Karen felt out of place here, like a polished vase in a dusty shop window. But she stepped out of the car with purpose. Together with George, she knocked on the door of a modest house. Pale curtains fluttered against the glass. The door opened to reveal an elderly woman with her gray hair pulled back neatly, sharp eyes, and hands that trembled as though they held more memories than they could bear. "Mrs. Jane Harper?" George asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "And who might you be?" George offered a business card, But it was Karen who stepped forward, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "We'd like to speak with you about a young woman who came through the clinic about 8 years ago. Her name was Grace Marilyn Johnson." At the sound of that name, Jane froze. Her gaze drifted inward, searching some distant past. Then she spoke, as if to herself. "Grace. The girl with the tiny belly," she murmured. "I remember. She came in all alone. Maybe running away. Scared of everything, even her own shadow. Never spoke about family. Almost like she didn't have one." Karen leaned closer, almost pleading. "Please, she's the mother of my son. And he's very sick. We need to find her. It's a matter of life or death." The old woman studied Karen for a long moment, as if looking past the expensive clothes and careful makeup into something deeper. "She gave birth in the middle of the night," Jane began. "I can still hear her crying like it was yesterday. Broke my heart. She kept saying she wanted him to have a better life, that she couldn't raise a baby on the streets. I tried to talk her out of it, but her mind was made up." George stepped closer. "What about the lawyer? The one who handled the adoption? Do you remember him?" "Oh, yes. Tall, glasses, expensive suit. Didn't belong in that part of town. Barely spoke to me. Just had her sign some papers and took the baby." Karen felt her chest tighten. "And what about Grace? What happened to her after?" "She left the clinic with him," Jane said softly. "But I heard she gave him up a few days later. Came back months afterward, though. Thinner. Haunted. Confused. Said she'd been lied to. That she'd been tricked into it. Screamed for her baby. Never forgot that look in her eyes." Karen's hand flew to her mouth as a wave of nausea rose. She felt like she was hearing a story that had been kept from her for years. "And after that?" George pressed. "Nobody knows for sure," Jane replied. "Some say they saw her on the streets downtown. Living near the subway station. But she kept vanishing, like mist. Like someone who didn't want to be found or didn't know how to come back." Back in the car, on the way home, Karen hardly spoke. Her hands stayed clenched in her lap, like she was holding in an earthquake. She was tricked, she finally whispered. "And I was part of it." George kept his eyes on the road, his voice quiet but kind. "You didn't know. You do now. And you're making it right. That's what matters." But Karen couldn't let it go. Grace, lost in crying for the son she thought had been stolen from her, it shattered every perfect image Karen had tried to maintain. The next 2 weeks became a plunge into the city's underworld. George dug deep, going places most people never would. Shelters, soup kitchens, back alley clinics, even all-night diners, anywhere someone might have crossed paths with a ghost like Grace. He showed Grace's photo to anyone who would look: social workers, nighttime security guards, soup kitchen volunteers, street performers, and the people who slept in doorways. And her name kept coming up. Always with the same strange note of sorrow. One popcorn vendor near a park told him, "I remember her." Poor thing kept talking to herself. Kept saying someone had stolen her baby. Screamed that they'd lied to her. That they took him. She looked like someone who'd been hollowed out inside. George wrote it down, then moved on. Late one evening, under an overpass up north, something finally stopped him in his tracks: graffiti smeared across a concrete wall. Amid the tangled spray of names and symbols was a message scrawled in trembling black letters. "Henry. I never left you. Mommy loves you." A confession. A cry. A promise that had never faded. That night, George took Karen there himself. She dressed in a dark jacket and pulled a cap low over her hair. Together, they walked through narrow alleys choked with the smells of mildew, garbage, and cold leftovers. Footsteps vanished into shadows. Voices drifted and disappeared. This was a different city, one most people pretended didn't exist. And then they saw her. Beneath the overpass, wrapped in dirty blankets like a discarded thing the world had long forgotten. Too thin, hair tangled, eyes empty, as if she'd long ago left this place for one only she could see. And in her hands, wrapped in a plastic bag, a photograph. A baby. Henry. Karen froze. Her heart pounded so loud it felt like it could burst. Grace? The woman's head lifted slowly. Her gaze took a moment to focus. And when it did, the photo slipped from her hands. And then, with a voice like someone who had had their soul ripped away, she screamed. "You! You're the one who stole my son." Grace's scream shattered the silence under the overpass like a crack of thunder out of nowhere. Raw and heavy with years of pain, it bounced off the concrete and hit everyone nearby. Some homeless people nearby backed away, too used to outbursts like this. Others just glanced over, tired eyes showing they'd already witnessed too much heartbreak to be surprised anymore. Karen froze. Her whole body felt like it had been gripped by an invisible winter, locking her in place. "Grace! I swear I didn't steal him," she whispered, her voice trembling. The woman cradled the worn photo to her chest, eyes wild and unfocused, like she was trying to shield her baby even now. "I saw you. I remember. You were with that guy in the suit. You took him from me." He was crying. Karen took a cautious step forward, but George gently held her back by the arm. "Easy," he murmured. "She's scared. Doesn't trust anyone. Not yet." Grace curled into herself like a wounded child, knees tucked close, breath shallow and shaky. Her grip on reality was fragile, flickering like a dying light bulb. But there was still a part of her in there faint, trembling, and alive. Swallowing her fear and the weight of years of silence, Karen stepped closer. Without caring about her expensive clothes or the grime of the sidewalk, she knelt down in front of her. "His name is Henry, isn't it?" she said, eyes glistening. "He's alive, Grace. He's your son. And he needs you." Grace froze. The world around them fell away for a moment. Her lips moved, barely audible. "Henry, my Henry?" "Yes," Karen whispered, moving a bit closer. "He's an amazing boy. Brave. Loving. But he's very sick, Grace. And only you can help him." A shudder ran through Grace's frail body. Tears filled her eyes, though none fell. Then, as if the weight of it all had finally crushed her, she crumpled onto her side, silent and trembling, as if years of grief and fear had broken free all at once. Karen reached out and held her, gently. Not with pity. With compassion. That night, George and Karen managed to get Grace to a private clinic. George called an old contact at Urban Hands, a nonprofit that specialized in emergency care for people in crisis. Karen covered all the costs without a second thought. A doctor examined Grace and noted severe malnutrition, early-stage pneumonia, signs of trauma, and deep psychological wounds. She was shattered, but not beyond repair. "She'll need time," explained Dr. Clarice, the clinic's lead therapist. "And real support. Someone who treats her like a person, not a problem." Karen nodded without hesitation. "I'll stay," she replied. "I owe her that much." In the days that followed, Karen visited Grace every afternoon like clockwork. She'd bring small things, fresh fruit, soft blankets, a novel with a beautiful cover, and sit by her side, telling gentle stories about Henry. She spoke about his contagious laugh, his fear of the dark, his love for dinosaurs and treasure maps, and the way he always held someone's hand when he was scared. Grace mostly listened in silence. Sometimes, a tear would slide down her cheek without a sound. Other times, a fragile smile would appear for a fleeting second, like a ray of sunlight breaking into a dark room. One afternoon, Karen brought a framed picture of Henry as a baby. Grace stared at it for a long time, her eyes glassy. "He has a scar on his left brow," Grace finally whispered. Karen gave a shaky laugh, blinking back tears. "He does. Fell while trying to walk before he was ready. Scared me half to death. That earned a tiny laugh from Grace, short, almost soundless, but real. The first one Karen had heard since they'd found her. And then, like something stirring to life after years of sleep, Grace began to speak. I was 19, she began, voice trembling. Ran away from home because my dad hit me. My mom drank until she passed out most nights. When I realized I was pregnant, I thought my life was over. Thought about ending it all. Karen listened, hands clasping Grace's. But one day, Grace continued, I felt him kick. So strong. It felt like he was telling me to hang on. To live. Her voice broke, but she kept going. I didn't know where to go. No one to turn to. That lawyer showed up out of nowhere, said my baby would go to a safe home until I could get back on my feet. I thought I was doing the right thing. But then I changed my mind. I tried to take him back, and the lawyer disappeared. William. Gone. And I remember seeing you, sitting in the car outside the clinic. I never forgot your face. Karen was crying openly now, the weight of it all spilling out. I didn't know, Grace. I honestly thought you agreed. That this was what you wanted. I was so desperate to be a mom that I never questioned it. I was blind. Or maybe selfish. I just grabbed the chance. Grace wiped her face with the handkerchief Karen had given her the day before. You love him, she asked quietly. More than anything, Karen replied, voice trembling but resolute. He's my world. My heart outside my body. Their eyes met, not as strangers, not as rivals, but as two women forever tied by one boy. Between them was pain, yes, but also something deeper, a fragile understanding, a bittersweet kind of forgiveness, and a fierce, shared love. Before Karen left that day, Grace reached out and took her hand. He still needs me, she asked softly. Karen's answer was unwavering, her eyes brimming. Yes. Now more than ever. Five days had passed since the meeting under the overpass, 5 days of silence, listening, and small victories. And now, Grace was lacing up a pair of clean sneakers. White, a bit too big, but neatly tied by hands that, for the first time in a long while, were being taken care of. At the clinic, she had received more than just warm showers and food. She'd been given dignity. A fresh haircut, lavender-scented soap, comfortable clothes that didn't weigh her down. The staff, with gentle patience, stitched her sense of self back together with invisible threads, a kind look here, an unexpected compliment there, until she could begin to remember who she had been before the pain. Or maybe, who she could become again. Karen was waiting in the lobby, hands clasped tightly in her lap, heart pounding like a drum. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her eyes carrying equal parts anxiety and hope. The world was about to change again, except this time, she was the one leading this new beginning. The night before, she'd talked to Henry. Tomorrow you'll meet a very special friend of Mommy's, she had told him, looking him straight in the eyes, swallowing back the fear that felt like a rolling thunder. Henry, with that innocent wisdom kids have, simply nodded and smiled. Like Grandma, he'd asked. Different, Karen replied, voice trembling, but very special too. And she cares about you a lot, even though you two haven't met yet. Grace walked down the clinic hallway as if she were crossing a bridge into a new world. She wore a beige knit top and dark jeans, her hair pulled into a loose bun with hands that still trembled. In her fingers was the worn photo of Henry as a baby, faded, laminated, edges bent. Her anchor. She slipped into the car without a word and stared straight ahead. You ready? Karen asked softly, keeping the emotion out of her voice. Grace took a breath and answered without hesitation. Never. But let's go. The drive to the hospital was mostly quiet, a silence loaded with all kinds of unspoken feelings, fear, gratitude, regret, and above all, love. A silence that can only exist between two people who, without meaning to, had come to share the same child. At the hospital, Henry was busy coloring dinosaurs on bright sheets of paper, markers scattered all over the bed. The room was decorated with handmade signs from his classmates that read "Stay strong, Henry," and "You're a fighter." One sign, written in wobbly letters, declared, "You're our favorite T-Rex." The sound of a gentle piano playlist mixed with the faint scent of antiseptic, creating a fragile sort of peace. When Karen and Grace stepped in, Henry's face lit up like sunlight through a window. "Mom," he called out, grinning. "Is that your friend?" Karen knelt beside him and held his hand, her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Grace. She's someone very special who really wanted to meet you." Henry didn't hesitate. He held out his hand with a big smile. "Hi, Grace." Grace felt her chest tighten. That face, she knew that face. She'd dreamed of him, cried for him, searched for him in the dark cracks of the city. And here he was, alive, kind, looking up at her as if the world was still full of good things. She stepped closer, kneeling gently next to the bed as if approaching something too precious to touch. "Hi, Henry," she managed, her voice trembling. "That's a really beautiful name. Do you like dinosaurs?" Henry asked brightly. Grace smiled, caught off guard by his honesty. I think I will. Especially if you can tell me all about them." And Karen watched the two of them as if witnessing a miracle in real time. It was as if time had paused to allow two wounded hearts to finally recognize one another. A reunion that didn't need a name, only honesty. Later, in a private office, the doctor came in carrying test results. His face was measured, professional, but kind. Even he seemed to understand that every word was going to matter. "We have full compatibility," he began. "Grace is an ideal match as a donor. Her marrow could save Henry's life. But we have to be clear, there are risks for both of them. Especially given Grace's recent health history." Karen's hands curled into fists. Grace kept her chin up. "Could it hurt me?" she asked, voice quiet. "There will be discomfort," the doctor replied. "Soreness, some fatigue, side effects. But none of that compares to what Henry would face without this transplant. We're optimistic. It will take strength. Physical and emotional." Grace turned to look at Karen. Her eyes no longer wavered. "There's only one thing I want," she said, her voice like a steady light in the dark. "I want to stick around. Even after this. I want to see him grow up. Even if it's from a distance. I don't want to disappear again." Karen took a deep breath and nodded, voice warm and sure. "I want that too. Not just for him. For me as well." They held each other's gaze, not like strangers tied together by a painful past, but like two women who had finally chosen each other for the sake of one little boy. That night, back at the clinic, Grace lay on her bed and stared up at the white ceiling. A soft light glowed in the corner of the room. And for the first time in years, she felt a kind of peace she couldn't quite name. For so long, she'd felt like a ghost, forgotten, unwanted, the crazy lady under the bridge. But tonight, none of that felt true. She was a mother. She had always been one. And all she'd ever needed was time to remember. And now, she was ready to fight. For Henry. And, finally, for herself. The night before the transplant arrived with a thick, almost sacred silence. The kind of silence that couldn't be broken by words, only by heartbeats, nervous, hopeful, scared. A silence full of memories, decisions, and a fragile kind of love being built in the dark. Karen couldn't bring herself to leave. She asked for a cot in Henry's room and stayed by his side long after he'd finally drifted off, his arms wrapped around his favorite dinosaur plush. Gently, she ran her fingers through his hair and wondered, for the thousandth time, how someone so small could hold her entire world. One floor up, crisp white sheets contrasted with the storm inside Grace. Earlier, the anesthesiologist had walked her carefully through every detail, the risks, the recovery, the long days of rest ahead. But none of that was what weighed most on her. No, what truly weighed on her was the past. That kind of pain doesn't throb like an open wound. It lingers in the scars. And tonight, alone in the dark, she finally allowed herself to remember everything. Grace never saw Henry's biological father again. To her, he was a fleeting mistake, a man who took her in for a few weeks when she was living on the streets, offering shelter in exchange for her silence. She only realized she was pregnant after he disappeared, like everything else in her life back then. She'd known him as Eddie, but never his real name. She didn't know if he was married, or if he even cared that a child existed. To Grace, he was neither a lover nor a villain. Just another scar. The only good thing left behind was Henry, and for that, she could never hate him. She was 19 years old, pregnant and sleeping in a makeshift shelter where the damp smell of mold mixed with exhaustion and the sound of quiet sobs. The women there understood one thing: life wasn't fair. But they still dreamed, in their own way. That's where she met Marta, a kind-voiced social worker with a gentle smile and promises wrapped in good intentions. "You don't have to do this alone," Marta had told her. "There's a safe clinic, good doctors. The baby will go to a family who can give him everything you can't right now." And with Marta came William Martin, a smooth-talking lawyer in a sharp blue suit, his pitch so practiced it felt like he'd said it 100 times before. "This is the best decision," he assured her. "You're doing what's best for him. Think about it: food, a real home, a future. Love. Once you get back on your feet, we can help you reconnect. Sign here. Trust us." Grace, starving, scared, hollow inside, signed. She didn't read. Didn't understand. She just wanted it to end. Just wanted to survive one more day. When reality hit her, panic set in. She called the cops. Screamed, begged, tore at her clothes in desperation. In the end, they wrote it up as aggressive and unstable behavior, and she was admitted to a psych ward for days. Silence there was colder than solitude. She never saw anyone from that clinic again. Downstairs, Karen sat in a quiet hospital lounge, hands clasped so tightly it was like she was holding on to herself. When the door swung open and Grace stepped inside, shoulders stooped under the weight of everything, her tired eyes were rimmed red from sleepless nights and too many unlocked memories. "I wanted to be a mother so badly," Karen whispered, voice trembling. "When William offered me that chance, I thought I was saving a life. Doing something good. But now I see I unknowingly bought a child. Helped someone commit a crime." Grace came closer, sat down beside her. Not with resentment, but with something deeper. With compassion. "You took good care of him?" she asked softly. Karen looked up, eyes glassy. "With everything I have. With fear, with love, with mistakes, but I never stopped loving him." Grace nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks but a strength beneath them. "Then that pain wasn't for nothing. Because Henry grew up loved. That's more than I ever thought possible for him." For a long moment, they sat together in a different kind of silence, one that wasn't cruel anymore. One that healed. Hours later, as the surgical team prepared the final details, the hallway to the operating room glowed with warm light. Even the antiseptic scent felt gentler. Karen walked alongside Grace, matching her pace, saying nothing more. They'd already said it all. At the door, Grace paused and reached for Karen's hand. "That boy gave me a second chance," she said. "And so did you." Karen took a deep breath, eyes bright with tears. "We both messed up," she replied, voice steady. "But now, we're making it right. Together." Grace smiled. "After this, will you let me tell him I'm his mom?" Karen nodded, smiling back. "He deserves the truth. And so do we." The door swung shut behind them. And there, in that suspended moment, two mothers, bruised and rebuilt, left the past where it belonged. They moved forward, hand in hand, with nothing but their courage, determined to save the one life they both loved most. The sun hadn't even broken the horizon yet when the hospital's main hallway began to pulse like a living artery. Nurses exchanged quiet instructions, surgical trays clinked in the distance, and automatic doors whispered open and shut like sighs of steel. It was a new day, but the atmosphere felt as tense as a battlefield before the first shot. And at the center of it all was Grace. She was dressed in a crisp white surgical gown, her fragile hair tucked under a cap. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, where there were no stars, only the face of her son, whom she had memorized like a prayer. Deep breaths filled her chest as she tried to remember all the reasons that had brought her here. Just a month ago, she was a ghost in the streets, a forgotten name, a blurred face. Now, she was a lifeline for a little boy she had only ever known through a photograph and a few scattered dreams. Karen arrived at the hospital just before they took Grace to pre-op. Her face was tired from sleepless nights, but her hands held something precious, a crayon drawing Henry had made that morning. It was simple, but full of meaning, a big red heart with 3 stick figures holding hands. One of them had curly hair, big eyes, and a huge smile. "He said this one's you," Karen whispered, pressing the drawing into Grace's hands. Grace felt her hands tremble as she held the crinkled paper, and her eyes filled with tears. "This is more than I ever thought I'd have," she choked out. "It's like he knew." Karen smiled. Words felt too small for the moment. And then they hugged and embraced that didn't need explanations or forgiveness. It was an alliance. A pact between mothers. The procedure to harvest the bone marrow was considered routine, but nothing about this felt routine. Grace was still underweight and recovering from years of hardship. Her history of anemia and deep emotional scars had put everyone on high alert. The anesthesia had to be perfect. The team had to be careful. Upstairs, Henry was already prepped. Dressed in light blue pajamas, surrounded by his favorite toys and comfortably sedated. Oliver was there, holding his son's hand like a lifeline, trying to tether them both to reality. Karen moved back and forth between the floors, checking the clock, watching the doctors, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. What if something went wrong? What if his body rejected it? What if she lost him? Her thoughts felt like a siren wailing in her head. At 9:14 a.m., a surgical resident emerged from the operating area, face hidden under a mask but eyes clear and determined. "The harvest was successful," she announced. "Grace is stable. Her body handled the procedure better than we hoped. But she's going to need close monitoring for a while." Karen felt like she could finally breathe again, her chest aching, as if she'd been holding her breath all morning. "And Henry?" she asked, voice trembling. "We're starting his transplant right now. The team is ready." Karen nodded, tears pricking her eyes as the resident handed her a hospital bracelet. "Henry Thompson, recipient. Grace Santos, donor match." Karen held it like a sacred relic, like proof that somehow, this crazy, beautiful plan had come together. Upstairs, they began carefully infusing the donor marrow into Henry's small body. To an outsider, it looked like just another hospital room, machines humming and IVs dripping in slow, deliberate rhythm. But to Karen, it was like planting a tiny seed in exhausted soil, a fragile life being given a chance to grow. She stayed by Henry's bedside, stroking his hair, memorizing his freckles. Time felt endless, each drip from the 4 like a tiny prayer. And then, hours later, the attending physician came to find her. His face was tired, his coat rumpled, but the hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "He responded well," he said. "He's sedated but stable. The marrow's starting to integrate. Now we wait, this is going to take time. Days, even weeks. But it's a good start." Karen broke into sobs. The kind that held all the fear, exhaustion, relief, and overwhelming love at once. "And Grace?" she managed to ask. "She's awake," the doctor replied. "And asking for you." When Karen entered the small recovery room, she found Grace pale against the sheets, eyes ringed with shadows. Even so, there was light in them, the light of someone who had given all she had. Grace tried to sit up but couldn't. Still, she smiled. "Is he okay?" she whispered, voice hoarse. Karen took her hand and held it tightly. "He's going to make it." "Because of you," she replied, her own voice cracking. Tears slid down Grace's face, tears that spoke of every ache and empty night that had led them here. Then it was all worth it, she breathed. Every fight, every terrible night, even losing you for a while. It was all worth it. Because I saved him. Karen nodded, blinking back tears. You did, she whispered. And I can never thank you enough. Over the next few days, time stretched and blurred, the hospital halls humming with quiet activity. Henry mostly slept, his body working silently to accept this second chance at life. And Karen was there through every hour, reading him stories, humming the lullabies he loved, never once letting go of his hand. And a few floors away, Grace was also healing. The pain was sharp, an ache that ran deep in her bones, but she refused anything stronger than over-the-counter meds. I want to remember this, she told the nurse, voice tired but resolute. I want to feel every second of this. It's proof that I did something good. Something real. Every day, Karen visited. Even exhausted, she never missed a visit. She'd bring Henry's little drawings, dinosaurs and hearts, and read him updates. And Grace would listen, smiling through her exhaustion. One note Henry wrote read. You smile like my mom. That one broke Grace. She held the crumpled paper to her chest and wept in silent gratitude. On the fourth night after the transplant, Karen was jolted awake by the rapid alarm of Henry's heart monitor. Suddenly, nurses rushed in. Doctors followed. Commands flew across the room. Heart rates dropping. Pressures crashing, we're losing him. Karen was pushed into the hallway, trembling as she stared through the glass at the flurry of hands and equipment. Time felt unreal, seconds lasting forever as she whispered every prayer she could remember. When the physician finally emerged, eyes red-rimmed, jacket damp with sweat, his words felt like they were spoken underwater. We stabilized him, he said. He fought hard. Karen sank to her knees, relief and fear flooding her in one dizzying wave. 2 days later, as morning light broke into Henry's room, his eyelashes fluttered and he finally, slowly, opened his eyes. Karen was there, leaning close, hands wrapped around his. Mom, he whispered. I'm here, baby, she replied, voice trembling with love. And Henry's next words, fragile but certain, took her breath away. I dreamed about Grace. She called me her sunshine. Karen felt her heart stop for an instant. She swallowed hard, knowing this was the moment they had all been hoping and fearing would come. She's someone very special, Karen said softly. Someone who loves you very much. Someone who gave you a part of herself. Do you want to see her? Henry, his eyes drowsy but clear, nodded. And that afternoon, they brought Grace to Henry's room. The hallway felt sacred as they walked, hands folded around each other's futures. When Grace stepped inside, Henry sat up against his pillows, surrounded by his toys and crayon drawings, looking so small and so strong all at once. He studied Grace for a long moment, as if recognizing someone he hadn't seen in years, someone who had never really left. Hi, Henry, she said softly. Hi, he replied. I like holding hands. Do you? And without a moment's hesitation, Henry reached out. Grace took his hand, carefully, as if it were glass, and held it. And that was all they needed. No long explanations. No big speeches. No guilt or fear. Just two hands, held together. And two hearts, forever changed. Time moved slower than the clock on the wall would have you believe. The hands kept spinning, but for Karen, Oliver, Grace, and Henry, every second felt suspended in a delicate balance between hope and fragility. Every beep of the heart monitor was a reminder that life was finally winning, but still had to be handled with steady hands and open hearts. The marrow was beginning to take hold. Rejection was slowly giving way to positive response. Blood tests showed progress. Henry's skin was regaining its color, and that sparkle, the one only happy kids seemed to have, was returning to his eyes. Doctors, who had been so cautious at first, were allowing themselves small smiles. They were using words like progressive discharge, reintroducing routine, optimistic outlook. Words that Karen tucked away in her mind like little trophies. But relief also brought a different kind of anxiety. What would come next? How do you explain to the world that the tired-looking woman in worn-out clothes, the one who until recently had nowhere to go, was the biological mother of the boy Karen had raised for 8 years? More importantly, how do you tell Henry clearly, honestly, that his story was more complicated than any bedtime tale Karen had ever told him? That afternoon, golden light poured into Henry's room through the curtains, casting a warm glow. Henry was flipping through a dinosaur book without really looking at it, tired, still recovering, but restless. Karen walked in quietly, a knot in her stomach. She held a glass of juice in one hand and an envelope in the other. But it wasn't just a snack, it was a conversation she'd put off for years. And now there was no avoiding it. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "Can we talk for a minute?" Henry nodded, curious, but didn't put the book down. She sat gently on the edge of the bed. Her heart was pounding like she was stepping off a cliff. "You know I love you, right?" she began, voice softer than usual. "More than anything in this world?" He looked up at her and grinned. "Of course. You even make me eat green stuff so I stay healthy." Karen smiled, but her eyes were already misting. "There's something really important I need to tell you," she continued. "And I want you to remember, nothing will ever change how much I love you." Henry frowned, pushing the book aside. "What is it?" Karen took a deep breath. "When you were really small, just a baby, I didn't give birth to you." Silence. He froze. "What?" "I'm not your birth mom," she said gently. "I'm your mom by heart. I held you when you were tiny and I never let go. Ever." Henry stared at her, confused. Then disbelief. "So? I'm adopted?" Karen swallowed hard. "Yes." "You lied to me?" Her hands trembled. "I thought I was protecting you. I was scared to tell you before. Scared you'd look at me differently. Scared I might lose you." Suddenly Henry began to cry loud, raw, like all the pain and confusion crashing together. "But I'm your son." "You are," she answered through her own tears. "You will always be my son. Every bit of me belongs to you. Every single heartbeat." Henry turned away, crying into his knees. He didn't know what to feel: sadness, anger, fear, it was all tangled up. Karen reached out but kept some distance, giving him the space he needed. "Your birth mother, her name is Grace. She's someone who had to go through really hard things," Karen explained, voice trembling. "She thought she couldn't take care of you, even though she loved you very much. And even though you didn't know her, she never stopped caring." "I don't want another mom," Henry sobbed into his hands. "I only want you." Karen cried too, not for herself, but for him. For the pain the truth had brought. For the boy she had spent years trying to protect. "I know, sweetie," she whispered. "And you can have me forever. But I also want you to know this part of who you are. You're my son. You'll always be my son. Nothing can take that away." The room went still. No words. Just his shaky breaths. "Do you trust me?" she asked after a long moment. Henry didn't answer at first. But then his tear-filled eyes found hers. Karen held out her hand. "Can I bring Grace in? She's here right outside." He hesitated. Then, slowly, nodded. Karen stood up, wiped her face, and opened the door. Grace stepped in carefully, hands trembling, eyes gentle and full of caution. She held a small box and walked to Henry's bedside, then knelt so they were at eye level. "Hi, Henry," she whispered. He didn't answer. Just looked at her, trying to make sense of the ache in his chest. Grace carefully opened the box and took out a worn photograph, one she'd kept safe all these years and had recently restored. It was Henry as a newborn, wrapped in a blue blanket. Alongside it was a tiny blue baby shoe. "I kept this," she said softly. "When I thought I had nothing left, I'd look at this and remember you. Even when I didn't know where you were, I never stopped hoping I'd see you again." Henry stared at the photo. then up into Grace's face and saw something familiar in her eyes. "Why did you leave me?" he asked. It was raw and honest, a question that carried all his pain. Grace took a shaky breath. "Because I was scared," she said. "I was alone. Hurting. I thought giving you up would save you. But by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. That's something I'll live with forever. But Henry, I never, ever stopped loving you. Not for 1 second." He glanced at Karen. Then back at Grace. Finally, slowly, Henry reached out and touched the tiny blue shoe. "Was this mine?" he whispered. Grace nodded, eyes shining. "Yes. It was. It always was." Karen sat beside Henry and put an arm around him. Grace took Henry's other hand. And there, between the three hands intertwined, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Henry took a shuddering breath and began to cry again, long, heartfelt sobs that melted into Karen's embrace. She kissed his hair and whispered, "You don't have to figure it all out now, baby. Just feel it. That's enough." Night had fallen, Henry's first night home after the hospital. No more wires, no tubes, no masks. Just his blue pajamas covered in dinosaurs, his favorite. But his eyes didn't sparkle like they used to. He was quiet, thoughtful. His body was healing, but something still ached deep inside. Oliver stepped into the room slowly, carrying a warm glass of milk. "Can I come in, champ?" he asked softly. Henry nodded without a word. He was lying on his side, staring at the wall. Oliver sat at the foot of the bed, waiting for Henry to speak. But Henry stayed silent. "Your mom told me you two had a big talk today," Oliver began carefully. Henry glanced over his shoulder, eyes full of sadness and a flicker of anger. "She's not my mom," Henry muttered. "Grace. She just showed up out of nowhere." Oliver took a deep breath. "Can I tell you a story?" he asked. Henry shrugged. "Once upon a time," Oliver began, "there was this little boy who was so wanted. A woman had dreamed of him for years. She prepared, hoped, wished, and one day, someone placed a baby into her arms. She loved him with everything she had. But that baby came from someone else. Another mom, someone scared, hurting, and very alone. Someone who thought she couldn't take care of him. Someone who cried when she had to say goodbye. Cried more than you can imagine." Henry pulled the blanket up to his chin. "She gave me away?" "Not the way she wanted to," Oliver answered. "But she loved you. She just didn't know how to protect you. And the mom who raised you, Karen, did that for her. For both of you." Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" Oliver shifted closer. "Because grown-ups make mistakes, kiddo. Sometimes we think we're protecting you, but we're really just putting off telling the truth. Now that you're a little older, we decided you deserve to know. The right way." Henry's eyes filled with tears, and then a shaky sob broke loose. "So, am I fake?" That question hit Oliver like a punch to the chest, but he kept his voice calm. "You are as real as they come," he said, brushing Henry's hair back. "And you are ours, mine, your mom Karen's, and now also Grace's. Nothing changes that." "But I only had one mom," Henry choked out. "Now I have two. It's confusing." "That's okay," Oliver whispered. "Confusion is part of love. The heart just needs a little time to stretch. Love doesn't split in two, it grows. What if I end up loving one more than the other?" Henry asked, rubbing his eyes with his fists. "You can," Oliver assured him. "And that's okay. You want to know why?" Henry sniffled. "Why?" "Because life doesn't come with a rulebook, it comes with people. And the most important thing is that every one of those people loves you. That means you get to love them back, any way you need to. Grace gave you life. Karen gave you the world. And me? I'll always be here to catch you when things get tough. With that, Henry launched into his dad's arms, crying softly. Oliver held him close, running a hand through his hair like he used to do when Henry was little. My heart kind of hurts, Henry mumbled into his dad's chest. That's because it's growing, Oliver replied gently. That's what happens when love makes space you didn't know you had. They stayed like that, father and son, in a silence so full it felt sacred. Before drifting off to sleep, Henry murmured, "Can I call her Grace for now?" Oliver smiled. "Of course you can. And maybe one day. I'll call her Mom, too." "Whenever you're ready," his father assured him. "When your heart tells you it's time." Henry's eyes fluttered closed, and that night he dreamed of 3 hands holding his. And so it began, new days filled with small, gentle connections. Grace spent hours at Henry's side, drawing silly airplanes and monsters, making up songs that didn't rhyme. She'd watch him play with a kind of quiet awe, like someone drinking in the pieces of her son's childhood she had missed. She knew she couldn't go back, she'd never see his first steps or celebrate his first lost tooth, but maybe she could help build new memories. And Henry, with a kid's natural wisdom, slowly let her in. He didn't ask too many questions, but his gaze softened whenever she was nearby, as if some part of him already knew her. Knew her scent. Knew her touch. One bright afternoon, the 3 of them sat together in the hospital's enclosed patio. The sky was clear, the air easy. Henry was tucked between Karen and Grace, looking up at the world like they'd finally come home. "Look!" Henry exclaimed, pointing at a plane high overhead. "You think it's going to another country?" Grace shielded her eyes with her hand and smiled. "Maybe. But we still have plenty of adventures to take right here." Karen glanced at Grace, her smile soft and warm. "I'm really glad you came back," Karen said. Grace held her gaze. She didn't need to say anything. The understanding was there, gratitude, respect, and something new and hopeful. The next morning, Detective George Miller arrived at the hospital looking serious. "We need to talk," he told Karen, pulling her aside. He showed her a tablet screen with a gossip site article. Businesswoman Karen Thompson's son may have been adopted under illegal circumstances, source claims. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. "How did this get out?" she whispered. "Could have been someone from the old clinic," George replied. "Or someone here at the hospital. But either way, the media smells a big story. They'll dig until they find everything." Karen steadied herself against the table. The old instinct to protect her public image surged, to hide this all away. But she knew better. "I'm not going to hide," she said. "Not anymore." And 2 days later, under bright lights and 100 flashing cameras, Karen stepped up to a podium and took a deep breath. 8 years ago, she began, her voice steady but emotional, "I became a mother in a way I thought was right. Today I know better. The woman who gave birth to my son was lied to, manipulated, and kept from him against her will. Her name is Grace. And she's here with me today because Henry is alive thanks to her." The cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters exchanged looks. And then Grace appeared, her hands trembling slightly, a framed photo of Henry as a baby held close to her chest. "Grace and I are both Henry's mothers," Karen continued. "In different ways, but with the same love." That sentence would make headlines across the country, picked apart, celebrated, debated, and burned into public memory. That night, in Henry's softly lit hospital room, Karen and Grace sat together with warm mugs of tea between them. Henry slept peacefully in his bed. "You know," Karen began, voice hushed, "for years, I thought being a good mom meant being perfect. Doing everything right, packing perfect lunches, making perfect meals, never making mistakes." Grace gave a gentle laugh. "And now?" "Now," Karen said, eyes shining with tears, "I just want to be the mom he needs. Even if that means sharing. Even if that means messing up sometimes." Grace paused before speaking. "He's lucky," she said finally. "2 moms who've made plenty of mistakes, but never stopped loving him." Karen smiled through her tears. "Love saved him," she whispered. "And maybe it saved us, too." At 10:13 p.m., Henry stirred and rolled over in his bed. Half asleep, he reached out into the dark. "Mom," he called. Both women answered together. "Yes, sweetie?" They exchanged a tearful smile in the quiet room, hands clasped, hearts full, as Henry drifted back to sleep. And in that hospital room, where so much had been lost and then found again, a family was reborn. Not like before. But in a way it had never been before, whole, real, and truly together. Three months later. It was a bright, breezy Sunday, one of those days that feel like they were made for new beginnings. Karen's backyard, once a pristine backdrop for polished parties and perfect photos, was now bursting with real life. The lawn had patches of dug-up dirt where Henry was excavating fossils, and a wooden swing swayed gently between two trees. Colorful pillows scattered across the grass were streaked with chalk, dried leaves, and cookie crumbs. Henry ran barefoot across the yard, laughing like someone who'd outrun his own shadow. In one hand, he held a stuffed dinosaur, his trusty sidekick. In the other, a tablet glowing with an animated game about meteors and craters. His curls bounced with every leap, his heart finally beating strong and steady. Grace sat on the porch in a wicker chair, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. In her eyes glimmered a light only someone who had almost lost everything could understand. "He's looking good, isn't he?" she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Karen, seated next to her and brushing wind-tossed hair from her eyes, nodded. "He is. And chattier than ever. This morning he told me dinosaurs deserved a second chance. That if he were president, he'd bring them all back in one giant park." Grace laughed, one of those full, free laughs that had become more natural with time. Yesterday, Grace added, he explained the three phases of a meteor impact. Complete with drawings, stats, and his own theory. Of course, Karen teased. That's the drama from his adoptive mom and creativity from his biological mom. Dangerous combo. They laughed together, a warm, easy laugh, without tension or hesitation. It was the sound of two women who'd once been worlds apart but were now walking the same path. Behind them, a small guest house tucked into the back of the property. It wasn't a favor or charity, it was a choice. An unspoken alliance built on something deeper than obligations, affection. Courage. Shared purpose. Inside Grace's cozy place, sunshine filtered through yellow curtains. Every piece of furniture, every bright detail was something she had chosen, rebuilding herself one item at a time. On one wall hung a bulletin board covered in Henry's drawings, handwritten notes of encouragement, and one worn photograph of him as a baby, the picture she'd kept like treasure for years. During the week, Grace attended a childcare training course. Every evening, she came home glowing with new ideas and eager to share them. Gone was the woman they'd once whispered about as the crazy one under the overpass. In her place was someone hopeful, healing, and full of purpose. Karen watched it all with quiet pride. For the first time in forever, she was learning to let go of control without fear. Finally, she understood that real love doesn't need to be perfect to be whole. That afternoon, Henry sprawled on the grass, working on a school project called My Story in 3 People. Karen knelt beside him, her heart tightening. "Can I see?" she asked. He held up his drawing with a grin. Himself in the center. Karen on the left, in a purple dress, a big smile. Grace on the right, her hair in a bun, arms reaching toward him. And at the top, 3 hearts tied together by a single line. At the bottom, careful handwriting read, "Thompson Johnson family. Our team for life." Karen felt a lump in her throat. Behind her, Grace's hands flew to her mouth, eyes shimmering. "I never thought I'd see myself in a school drawing," Grace whispered. Karen touched her arm. "It's not just a drawing," she said softly. "It's how he sees the world. And we're in it. Together." That night, the house smelled like melting cheese and homemade sauce. Grace was making Henry's favorite pepperoni pizza with a stuffed crust while Henry helped by scattering cheese across the counter, floor, and himself. Karen cleaned up with a smile, snapping photos like someone capturing a tiny miracle. When they finally sat at the dinner table, hands dusted in flour and bellies full, it was imperfect and absolutely perfect. After dinner, Henry rushed in with his tablet, eyes shining. "Mom! Grace! Check this out." He showed them the video of the press conference from months ago. Comments scrolled past. "Such a beautiful story. Two incredible moms. The world needs more people like you. You're famous for being brave," Henry exclaimed. Karen wrapped an arm around him. "You're the brave one," she replied. "You just lay there," Henry teased, grinning. "Exactly," Karen said. "And still, you woke us up." When the house was finally quiet and Henry was asleep, one picture of Karen holding him as a baby on one side of his bed, another of Grace laughing with him on the other, Karen slipped outside. She found Grace under the stars. "Can't sleep?" "I'm scared it's all a dream," Grace said honestly. Karen settled next to her under a light blanket. "Sometimes I feel the same," Karen replied. "Like the world might take this away as quickly as it came." Grace nodded, then looked up at the sky. "I never thought I deserved this. A home. A son. Peace. You deserve all of it," Karen told her. "You always did. It just took a long road to get here." A gentle silence followed. "You think Henry will understand all this one day?" Grace asked softly. "The pain. The beginning. The truth?" Karen didn't hesitate. "He already does," she answered. "Maybe not in words yet. But he feels it. That's what matters. Love speaks louder than anything." And together they sat, two different roots tangled into one strong tree, looking up at a sky full of stars, where every end could still become a new beginning. Inside, Henry breathed peacefully in his sleep. A tiny, handmade sign tucked between his photos read in careful letters. "My name is Henry. I have two moms. Two stories. And one heart that's big enough for both."